So it's 1936. What happens? The Italians invade Ethiopia. Haile Selassie has to leave. However, in 1941, he returns and he says, I want to do something to advance my people. Education is the secret. So he renews diplomatic relations with the United States. It couldn't come at a perfect time. Everything in history is timing, and he wanted to get with the United States to do something about global poverty. What was Point 4? When did it happen? Who was involved? Was it historical in nature? Was it a miracle? Was it two countries that cooperated with one another? Yes, all that and more. And what this film will show you is the principles involved, the history, and what happens when two countries and two leaders get together for the common good. After World War II, President Harry Truman wanted to do something to help people that were ravaged by World War II. And there were a lot of people. And he thought, I need to come up with an idea. His inaugural address of 1949 was vastly approaching, and a low-level State Department worker, employee, had an idea. He had to get into the White House to talk to the president. Not an easy thing to do, but he did it. He came up with an idea. People are starving. What are we to do? Yes, we can send them sacks of rice. We can send them sacks of grain. That's a Band-Aid on the gaping wound. Why not do something more? What does the United States export? What do we have that we can give? Our agricultural know-how. So, President Truman went to the best of the best in the Midwest of the United States and said, we want to help these people. What can we do? Build an agricultural college. Teach them to teach themselves. Become self-sustaining. Grow their own food. Be the solver of the problem, not just get a handout, but get a hand. And that's what happened. And this documentary is going to show you how that happened, who was involved, and what is happening with that university in the future. It's a fascinating story, which I hope you all will enjoy.
I'm Ted Vestal. I was in Ethiopia as Associate Director of the Peace Corps from 1964 to 1966. I was Professor of Political Science at Oklahoma State University, which has the longest continual relationship with Ethiopia of any American school or college. I taught political science courses in constitutional law, civil liberties, civil rights, in what much of the world would call human rights. I also taught courses in world politics with a heavy emphasis on Ethiopia and Africa. My interest in Africa really was whetted when I went for an interview with the Peace Corps in 1962. One of my college classmates, Bill Moyers, was the public affairs director, public information director of the Peace Corps at that time, and I sent him a resume which led eventually to my going to Washington for interviews, culminating in an interview with Sergeant Shriver, the director. He asked if I would be interested in going to Ethiopia or Nigeria, and I said yes, and began to find out as much as I could about Ethiopia at that time. There was a book that was a bestseller at the time called The Blue Nile by Alan Moorhead, and that was a story primarily about Ethiopia, which really whetted my interest. Originally from Sherman, Texas, I went to undergraduate school at what is now the University of North Texas. I was a music major. I had a music scholarship, and then had a scholarship to the Yale Law School and went to Stanford and got my MA and PhD in political science there. And after service in the Army, I started a career in academic work. When the Peace Corps appeared, and I became interested in government service at that time. Right, John Kennedy captured the imagination of American young people when he started talking about a Peace Corps. As I recall, he talked about being composed of young volunteers, and the American college public immediately responded to that in a very positive way. And the Kennedy campaign picked up on that idea and made it an important part of the campaign. So that when Kennedy was inaugurated as president, one of his first actions shortly thereafter was to establish the Peace Corps with an executive order. And the response was overwhelming from young Americans from all walks of life. There was a spirit of volunteerism that was very strong that continues today with Americans who work in the Peace Corps, but it was especially strong in the early 1960s when the Peace Corps first began. The Eisenhower administration was a very efficient one, run like a good military operation, but it was composed of what seemed at the time like old men, and suddenly Kennedy was there with much younger cohorts in his administration. And that again captured the imagination of Americans, and many young people got interested in government service and serving overseas at that time, and that led to large numbers of volunteers, Peace Corps volunteers, going out to different countries throughout the world. The largest Peace Corps group at that time in 1962 went to Ethiopia, where they were greeted at Jubilee Palace by Emperor Haile Selassie, who thanked them for coming to Ethiopia to put an end to ignorance in their country.
My name is James Gilbert Romas. I came, as I said, from a small farming community. I actually came here and ended up over the years getting all 3 degrees. I have a PhD in marketing, was my terminal degree, then was served on the marketing faculty. And then I was in our outreach programs. It was President Truman had just won the election, and he was preparing for his inaugural address in January of 49. Of course, this was after World War II. And there was a guy in the State Department named Ben Hardy. And Ben, as I understand it from my reading, now I'm interpreting here, but he had an idea, and he had an idea that went along these channels, that the United States should share its technical information with developing countries of the world. Because, that was, the underlying thing here was communism, and there was great fear that the developing countries would look toward communism as a solution. So his idea was if the United States, with all its power, would help developing countries, not give them things, but help them to develop, that the world would be a better place. So Ben Hardy presented this to dignitaries at the State Department, and they didn't like the idea. They were, it was right after World War II, and sort of people didn't want to share things like that. So he kind of went around the State Department and met with an assistant to President Truman. Unbeknownst to the State Department, he presented his idea to them about this development concept. Well, the assistant, whose name I don't know, took that information to Truman. Truman liked it so much that he put in his inaugural address, he had 4 points. The 4th point was point 4, or became known as point 4, and that was for the United States to begin an effort to share its technical knowledge with the developing world. Well, the State Department was caught off guard by this, and his speech. So it took a year and a half before Truman got the legislation passed to make this happen, because there were some apparent roadblocks, as you know, government. But it was passed, called the Technical Cooperation Assistance Act, and we now put these two stories together. Bennett knew Senator Kerr. Senator Kerr and some other people knew that a guy like Henry Bennett, who came from a very religious background, very workmanlike, he actually came from Arkansas, but then spent his life here, that he had the characteristics to maybe pull this off. So with Senator Kerr's recommendation, President Truman appointed Henry Bennett as the first director. Over the years, as the federal government came to provide less funding to the USAID, by the way, the .4 program turned into USAID. Relevant to OSU and many other schools, federal money started drying up for big development projects. And so OSU's international involvement started declining. And so we had been in it 50 years. And after reading all this stuff in my conversations with Conrad at the same time, I said, the key to me was we want to revitalize our next 50 years in international in a broader context and with a structure to support it, i.e. the School of International Studies came about. But the key thing we had was we had tradition. And if you'll read any of our documentation, we leaned back on our early .4 involvement. And I remember I had many lunches here for international dignitaries, and I always said, was able to point to the watercolor up here of the University of Ethiopia and say, we are not new. Because we started the School of International Studies in '99, we've been in this for 50 years. In fact, we celebrated the .4 thing, which was inaugurated in '49 by starting the school in '99, 50 years. And it's helped us to let people know that OSU is not late getting involved, but got in early. So it was that theme that I kept pressing is, we have a legitimate case to do this, and that helped sell it to the faculty. Sure, well, this room's an interesting story. In fact, the guy that did it just walked by a minute ago. That's who I waved at, Jennings Burris. Well, I don't know about you, but to me, if you've got a place or a statue of Mr. Bennett, or it means more to people than just you say you were in the .4 program. So we wanted to dedicate a room and make the room look like it's got representation of what transpired in the .4. So we created this room, and it was done by one of our employees here who has a background in interior design. So he studied a lot of background materials, and for example, the carpet in here, the design, you see how unusual it is? Well, it's designed after a picture, famous painting in Ethiopia. And in simple terms to me, it stands for warding off the evil spirits. So we always tell people when they come to lunch here, you're okay, because we've got you covered, you know. Got the evil spirits that are taken care of.
My name is Ben Jackson. This is my wife, Susie Jackson. We were over there from 1955 until 1959. About 4.5 years total. And part of the time was in Addis, part of the time was Alamaya. Well, as one fellow put it, when he first arrived, there was no moon or stars, and the sun was just a little bitty thing. No, it was not that bad. We found that the people were nice, and that the weather was wonderful, and that the opportunities seemed to just have not limited. And so we really are glad and grateful that we went over there, and feel like we did do some good. As relates to Ethiopia, I'm just finishing my master's degree there at OSU. When the representative to recruit people to go there and work in Ethiopia, this is a contract between Oklahoma State and the USAID, or whatever they called it then. And one Saturday after I had completed my work out there in the research lab, I got this phone call from the representative, whom I had never met. And I only had a master's degree. I just finished my master's. And the voice on the other end said, "Dr. Jackson," and I thought he was pulling my leg. And I said, "Yes, this is Dr. Jackson." And he said, "Hi, Staten, who you know, I believe, he's one of the men in agronomy, has recommended you to go to Ethiopia and work over there and help establish a university." And I was taken aback. I couldn't quite figure out what's on. I didn't think this professor even knew me to recommend me to start with. After all, he had a lot of students in his classes. And I hadn't even thought, it was the last thing in my mind about going to Ethiopia. But when I mentioned it after I hung up the phone, and Susie said, "Oh, that would be wonderful." I thought, if she can go in, if she's that enthusiastic to go, I can put up with anything. We had one daughter. Just, what was she, about 2 years old?
She was about 2 or 3. Let's see, 55. I think she was born in 52, so she was about 3.
I had majored in field crops, what they call field crops, in the agronomy department, which consisted of a field crops group and a soils group. And the man who had recommended me was a field crops man, and I'd had some classes under him. So that's the main, I guess he identified me as somebody I never got the impression that he cared about me that much until I got this phone call. No, my plan was to obtain a scholarship and go to the University of Minnesota and get my PhD degree, because my people down there where I was working in Stillwater were saying, "Ben, you have to have that doctorate." And I wasn't sure how I could do that. But the only thing I was hoping for was a scholarship. Well, when this Ethiopia offer came, I thought, well, maybe I can save enough money to help get me through my doctorate at Minnesota. So that was one of the driving forces for me to go to Ethiopia, was to be able to, because as you well know, most people just getting out of school have very little resources.